Well, welcome everybody to the YouTube live version of the Wolverine podcast. We are ready to go, and we'll be cooking along, talking Michigan football for the next however amount of time, 45 minutes or so, an extended version of what you've gotten used to. We'd be remiss to have anybody but the guy that we've got sitting there in his own studio, Tom Crawford, longtime contributor to the Wolverine, frequent podcast guest, and someone that is very well known to our folks. Tom, appreciate you being with us on our initial version of this podcast.
I love the live version. Let's get some input. We got some great followers with some great input and intel in Michigan football, great passion. So what better way to give them ownership and have them contribute with questions and make it as interactive as much as possible.
No question. And as he said, we are open to questions. We have a lot of things that we want to talk about on this game week for the Michigan Wolverines. We heard from Jim Harbaugh yesterday, and we'll be talking about a lot of things that he had to say. And we will certainly entertain your questions as we go along. Tom, I want to open up with this. I mean, it's the obvious one. We got the big news that Jim Harbaugh has announced his decision, and it's not one guy, it's two guys. You're going to have your senior quarterback, Cade McNamara, starting week 1 against Colorado State, and then J.J. McCarthy in week 2 against Hawaii. Your thoughts when you heard that?
Well, I mean, Jim Harbaugh is a different duck, and I liked it, to be honest with you. I know it, and we've talked about this quarterback thing, throughout the summer, and people kind of got burned out on it. But I mean, he brings it back up. He stirs the pot, if you will. Week number 1, I like talking about starters. Jim Harbaugh, he's been hush hush in his 7 years, whatever, with two deeps, depth charts. We don't see that. And we got to go way back in time to see that. And I think he's approaching this the right way. I mean, I think there's some frustrating elements to it because you start J.J. McCarthy against Hawaii, okay? And I watched the first half of the Hawaii Vanderbilt game, and I'm thinking, good Lord. I mean, I understand I've pounded this too much about the week schedule, but first time in 78 years that Michigan hasn't played a Power 5 / Notre Dame. But that Hawaii team is really bad defensively. If Vandy can hang 63 on you, I mean, so how do you really? I mean, and I'm not smart enough to figure this out, but how do you really evaluate what JJ does against Hawaii? And if you throw too much, you're going to be running up the score. So I hope I like Jim Harbaugh's approach, John. But keep that going until you get somebody pulling ahead. That's just my feeling. Because if both are very good, and they are, and it's a tie, if you will, or close to a tie, then just keep this until you resolve the situation.
Yeah, I laid out a faux schedule on our website where you're skipping every other week and showed the opponents that McNamara gets and showed JJ, and he would be ending up starting in Columbus. And we already have a bet over that one as to who's going to start there. But I agree with you in that you're talking about different opponents and different skill levels. We don't know exactly. We know that Colorado State has got the transfer portal guys in. We think that they're going to be a little bit bolstered, but you really have to, as I'm sure that they're going to, come up with ways to take that into account as they assess these guys in these games. And it's not like there's only going to be one guy that goes the whole way. And Jim Harbaugh noted that, you're going to have J.J. McCarthy coming into the first game. And I assume that you'll see both quarterbacks in game 2. So I can see it, but it does call to mind, is this a little bit of a silver lining to that schedule that you have not been terribly happy about that non-conference schedule, because if this was Notre Dame followed by Oklahoma, I'm not so sure that they would be doing this split quarterback thing.
Well, I wasn't asking for Notre Dame followed by Oklahoma. I was just asking for a Power 5 team. Have Iowa
Right.
State come in or something like that. So it's a little bit higher grade, if you will, caliber of play than what you have from these three opponents. Now, Colorado State, Jay Norvell is a good coach. I'm telling you what. I mean, he and Dave Clawson of Wake Forest are guys that I know in the business. Those guys have been earmarked as up and comers, and Colorado State could be a viable opponent. We'll see how they do going forward. You really don't know what you got in your schedule till you go to the end of the year. Because remember, in '97, we thought, oh my God, what a daunting schedule. But by the time the season ended, it wasn't so daunting. It was great and national championship worthy. But I'm just saying, you can't really evaluate a schedule till the end. So I'm gonna, even though the Hawaii thing was, as far as a first indicator is it's not a very good team. But yeah, I mean, and how do you? I got to ask you this, John. I mean, how do you your evaluation goes on beyond throwing and managing the game, right? And the running game and things of that nature. So it's gonna be interesting how they post game Hawaii, how the questions about quarterback evaluation, particularly on the Monday presser, it's going to come down after he's looked at the film.
There's no question. What this tells you, I think, without any question, and Jim Harbaugh cast it as not a demotion for McNamara, but definitely a promotion for McCarthy because of what he's done, what he's showed, the growth he's produced. And my question to you is, how much of this, I think they felt some leeway with that schedule. They would not cast it that way because you're going to be insulting opponents and all that kind of thing. But how much of this do you think is genuinely that they are right neck and neck? And I believe that they're close, or he would not do this. But is there an element that you've had so much talk about, okay, we're in the era of the transfer portal, we've got to be careful, and is there some of that to this?
Well, yeah, I mean, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, I'm sure it's there. The idea of, I mean, we gotta reward both of these kids, right? I mean, they both deserve, and Cade, I'm not down on Cade McNamara. My God, I got people that have been inside the practice that I really trust in credibility wise, know what they're seeing. That he's looking really good. I'm talking about Cade McNamara. Number 12 is looking really, really good. But and number 9 had the disadvantage. He missed spring ball, and I think that set JJ back a little bit with that shoulder thing. So I think there's that element, and you're right, John. The fact that they're playing, such an inferior schedule, that does open the door. Granted, I mean, going against Michigan's defense, the way we're hearing about Michigan's defense, the ones versus ones, probably more of a challenge than going against Hawaii or University of Connecticut. But still, it's a game situation. You got the crowd, you got all these elements, and so it's at least some kind of gauge of performance in the two quarterbacks, and it goes beyond the two quarterbacks. I'm just as much interested of that receiver room and who's gonna. I mean, you got 6 viable guys. How that's gonna play out too. I mean, who's gonna come to the forefront in that regard?
No doubt about it. I think we're going to be talking about those receivers here in this particular broadcast. But I will say this. I hearken back. This is giving me a little bit of flashback, and not to compare guys to the individuals I'm going to name, but situationally, I'm getting a little bit of Brady Henson flashback, because
You think?
to this day, Tom Brady will tell you that, hey, I am what I am in part because I was
Yeah.
pushed as hard as I was. I
Yeah.
was fighting to survive against a Drew Henson.
Yeah, and I think and maturity, mental toughness, resiliency, and I think Cade McNamara. I mean, he's no fool. I mean, he knows that the majority of the fan base get enthralled with quick feed and flashy play, which JJ I guess would fit that mode more. Maybe for fan friendly, fan appealing. I mean, he realized that's going on, and he's just tunnel vision and going forward. And the fact he was voted captain speaks a lot about the leadership. But I mean, this is now beyond Tom Brady, Drew Henson. I mean, look at the situation going on in Texas A&M. I mean, we go back to Chris Leak and Tim Tebow in Florida. I mean, really good teams have issues of having two quarterbacks. And I agree with Harbaugh. I hate the term that means you have no quarterback. That's not true. It means you're double the pleasure. You are blessed with a great situation because, as we all know, one play away, you're down to number two, whoever the backup is. So I think this is a great situation. It's a position of strength. It's the least of my worries, to be honest with you, John, on this Michigan football team, either side of the ball, is the quarterback.
Absolutely. We have seen Big Ten teams where they have that one starter and they lose him and immediately they fall right off the table. And
Right.
you're not going to see that in this situation. So all of that being said, forced choice here, who is going to get the game 3 start for the Wolverines? And in the mind of Tom Crawford as you're looking at this thing.
Well, you can say what you want. You can say what you think is going to happen. I'll just say what I think is going to happen. I think Cade McNamara is going to be, for my, because the fact he's on top of his game, and I mean he's not going to. I don't think he's going to screw this thing up, and JJ is going to play great as well. But I think Cade McNamara has that slight edge, if you will, and I think he'll be the quarterback against UConn. But moving forward after that, when you get into real football, I mean Big Ten play, and I'm not talking just about going to Kinnick Stadium. I think Maryland, Mike Loxley is a good coach, okay, and they
Mhm.
got to his brother at quarterback. They got some transfers. I think Maryland is going to be at least a legitimate opponent, and it's Big Ten play. So we started with the Maryland game, with the September 24th. That point forward, the season starts. Particularly, it gets really ramped up when they go to Iowa City to play the Hawkeyes.
Yes, and speaking of those games and the import of them, will this be a situation where the head coach and the quarterbacks coaches and the offensive coaches maybe lean toward a little quicker hook if the starter, and I agree with you, I do believe it'll be Cade McNamara in game 3, but we don't know. Will there be a little bit quicker hook if, say, you have a guy that's struggling a little bit, throws a couple picks early, and how do you balance that if that's the way you're going to go with this thing, against, okay, you got to let them play through a certain amount. We remember Brian Greasy in '97 struggling mightily in the first half against Iowa, and yet he comes back and battles back and gives you helps to give you an undefeated season.
Well, I mean, the ultimate example of that, of going with a quick hook, is the 1999 Michigan State game. We know that. I mean, Tom Brady in that game, he played incredible in the second half, brought Michigan almost back to and they lost that game 34-31. But you remember how short arming, short throwing, if you will, into the ground. Tom Brady was throwing the ball in the flats in that first quarter. He was terrible. In comes Drew Henson, and he hits Marcus Knight on a fly pattern. All of a sudden, we're gonna ride the rapids with Drew for the rest of the second quarter into the third quarter. Then Drew throws a pick six. Okay, and then it goes back to Brady, and then he finishes strong. So is it gonna be that, kind of do a tango with these two guys? I don't know. And is that necessarily a bad thing? I don't know. I don't know.
Well,
Maybe that isn't such a bad thing.
yeah, I don't know. I see McCarthy getting a fair amount of playing time, regardless of whether or not he's the starter. I think if McCarthy at some point is the starter, there's not there's not as much situational play that you're going to get out of McNamara. But maybe for that reason, maybe I give McNamara a little bit longer leash to battle back. We saw the bad pick in the early going against Ohio State by Cade McNamara, and yet you saw him certainly overcome that, and the offense overcome that in a really overwhelming fashion to beat by 15 points a team that had been routing the Wolverines the last couple times out before that.
Yeah, and there's another component to this thing. which I think is going to be, the kind of the message that's not been stated loud enough is a running game. Blake Corum, I think, is. I mean, the guy is a monster right now. I mean, if I was a linebacker, I wouldn't want to tackle that dude. Put on 12 pounds of muscle. Donovan Edwards, you know what he can do out of the backfield. I think this backfield is going to take the pressure off both quarterbacks, and you're going to get a potent offense. I think this Michigan offense is going to be really, really good.
Yes, and that will help both of these quarterbacks. I mean, we haven't even mentioned, you talk about running backs, you talk about offensive line. All of that goes into the fact that these quarterbacks ought to be able to have a high level of success. And we're going to talk about that right around the corner. But my last quarterback question, and we spent a lot of time on it, but I'll tell you what, it's the most scrutinized position. And this year you ramp it up to level 11 in terms of the quarterback scrutiny.
Yeah.
The guy that does not win the starting job, say when the Big Ten rolls around or that first road game at Iowa, how does the non-starter react in your mind? And how important is it for him to react well?
Well, it's important for him to react well, and I think either one will react well. To be quite honest with you, I think both of these young men, and just being in front of them, and especially with Cade in the press conferences, and we'll get more of JJ this year, I'm assuming. That I mean he's a sharp young man. I mean, I think they'll handle it well. To be honest with you, John. I mean, this is big time football, big boy football. And they're going to have opportunities. And I think with JJ, I mean, the stigma he's got is, he's too loose with a football, whatever. I think that's a little bit overstated. But I mean, he's got to clean that up completely. He's got to, if he wants to win to be the starting quarterback, he's got to be as proficient in terms of the cleanliness of his game, if you will, as much as Cade. And then because I think it's pretty obvious to a lot of people, even in the unsophisticated, that he's the more athletic guy. John Jansen was talking about that. I saw a tweet from him, who was the color man, who's pretty good expertise in John Jansen, that has a higher ceiling. Now that's a former player saying that. And I think it's apparent he's got the higher ceiling, but will that higher ceiling have the opportunity to be utilized, and will he fulfill it if he gets the opportunity?
No doubt about it. And with that, you wonder who's the man for the moment. You can acknowledge that McCarthy has the higher ceiling, just like if you had a crystal ball, you could have seen that Tom Brady, although they didn't know it at the time necessarily, had the higher ceiling than Brian Griese back in '97. But again, you talk to the guys on that team, and most of them will say Griese was the guy for that time. They agreed with that.
Yeah.
So it is fascinating to see it play out either way, regardless of who's starting. You've touched on the running backs. You've touched on the wide receivers. Ton of talent there. You're going to have a good offensive line. You've got great tight ends. Will Jim Harbaugh decide to maybe open up the offense a little bit more than perhaps he did last year? You've got a situation where, hey, you've got that running game going. You got exactly what Tom Crawford has been begging for, to have the high-powered Michigan running game. But on the other hand, I hear the detractors, and some are just trying to make trouble. I know that, and some of them pretty well.
Yeah.
That say, oh yeah, who wants to come there and run the ball 40 times a game, or who should, if one of these guys doesn't like the offense or gets passed over, should they leave? That kind of stuff. How do you balance that, and how do you think they'll go about this whole business offensively this year?
Well, I think in the Colorado State game, it's going to be Colorado State's going to throw the ball, and Michigan's going to throw it. I think this game on Saturday is going to be entertaining if you like offense. And I think once again, this is one of the plus sides of the inferior competition, if you will. I mean, let's be real. I mean, you can consciously say, we can take some chances here, guys. I'm talking about the coaching staff, Jim Harbaugh. because we're going to win this football game. We're a better team, so you can probably take chances against inferior opponents, throwing early, doing a little bit more dicey stuff. You don't want to empty the playbook. I mean, against for future opponents, but still, I think they're going to throw the football and find out who can throw it better. And so I think you're going to see a lot of it, a lot of air open attack, if you will, particularly against Colorado State, because Colorado State is going to play into it as well. The other element is go back to the running backs. I mean, when you got Donovan Edwards, of how you can utilize him in the flats, swing passes, and and my God, he can throw the ball. We saw that in the Big Ten championship game. I really think that it's going to be an exciting offense. It's going to be entertaining, and I think the running backs will be happy. I think it's going to be a balance. All I really want, fans say, you want balance. I'm not saying the 70 or 80 plays have to be 50-50, but throw the ball 25, 30 times, run the ball the same amount of times, or maybe throw the ball 35 times and run the ball 35 times. Michigan's going to have a balanced attack, particularly when you get those tight ends.
Yeah, you don't want to come into not even necessarily Maryland, but Iowa, as we have talked about, without practiced in a game, stretching the field a little bit,
Yeah.
and knowing that you've got that ability, because you're probably not going to be able to just line it up and blow Iowa out of there, in their own building, with that fan base that they've got going. Certainly, we saw in the Big Ten championship game, even though Michigan eventually blew Iowa out, they used some things to loosen up the Hawkeyes, including your reference to Donovan Edwards and his 75-yard throw downfield. No, it's there are things, and I wouldn't expect that sort of play in these early games, but you have the luxury of, I would think, being able to really get a lot of people on the field and be able to throw the ball downfield, enough so that you're feeling confident in that part of your game.
Yeah, I don't think you're and one other element of which is a position of strength is special teams, and I don't think you're going to see Brad Robbins participate much on Saturday, because I don't think they're going to have to punt much.
Yeah, well, that's you get a few people that will say, okay, let's not get carried away because Colorado State brought in some people and
They
they
got a
might
lot
be
of
better.
chances. Yeah,
But
yeah.
but on paper, you're thinking that no, this is not going to be a big workout day for your punter. So when you think about the past game, when you think about the having Ronnie Bell coming back to this team, you think about the other veterans, Cornelius Johnson, and the younger guys that were emerging last year, the Roman Wilsons of this team, and you throw in all these younger players that are just wowing others. You do have a number of guys that could be potentially your leading receiver. My question to you is, who's going to be the number one guy in terms of catches and yardage this year?
Well, number one guy is an easy one for me. It's Ronnie Bell. I think he's going to have a great year. And I mean, I was just watching the other day the 2019 Michigan State game, which seems like an eons ago. I love that game, 44-10. Ronnie Bell had 8 or 9 catches in that game. He was brilliant. That's a long time ago. He's played a lot of football for Michigan, and I think he's the leader in that room. He's the mentor for Darius Clemens, who is that stretch guy that Michigan, a big stretch guy, going to stretch that field. I mean, you just hit CJ and Roman Wilson. East Lansing's Andrel Anthony
Mm.
Jr. is going to have a tremendous year. He's worked so hard this summer. That's a deep, deep room. Now, Michigan's had great receivers, John. And I mean, do you ever remember of the years covered? Let's just go the years covering Michigan football for you, which is well beyond 30 years of this kind of quality depth at the wideout position ever.
I don't see it as that. I mean, 1 to 8 so
Yeah,
much. I
there's
mean,
8 guys actually. with the
at,
Freshmen.
at the very top. I mean, it's tough to beat an assemblage of Braylon Edwards, Jason Avant, who, by the way, is going to be your sideline reporter on Michigan Radio, and Steve Breston. I mean, as far
Well,
as
that's the
one
big
through
three.
three,
Yeah, that's I know.
but
I agree with
what you're
that. That's
saying, I know what you're saying
yeah.
exactly.
I know what
To
you're
go
saying
one
too.
through eight. No, not in the 32 years that I've been following this team or doing so professionally. And even hearkening back, I mean, before that, you're talking about coaching staffs that weren't all that interested in throwing the ball all that much. So
Yeah, that's
yeah,
true.
no question
Yes.
that I tend to agree with you about Ronnie Bell leading this team because of his inside outside ability. I
Yes.
mean, he can slide into the slot. He can do so
He
many
can do it
different
all.
things. But I will say this: don't forget about last year's leader, who happens to be Cornelius Johnson, because this is a kid that at times stretched the field last year. I remember the big sliding catch in the snow against Ohio State, and some other times. We had Bryant Wilson checking in saying that he thought Bryant Williams, rather, that is checking in on our Facebook Live saying, I believe Roman Wilson will be our number one receiver this year. So there's, there are a lot of ways that this thing could go. But I'll tell you that those three guys mentioned alone, and I'm glad you brought Andrell Anthony into the whole discussion, because this is a kid with just amazing talent, and they let him showcase it in that one particular game last year, and then
Yeah.
I think he got a little bit nicked up later in the season. But I
Yeah,
think
he did.
you spend another year in the bulking yourself up a little bit, but I know he's retained tremendous speed, so watch out for him as well.
Well, John, I mean, a question more than a statement. Mikey Sainristil. I mean, and now he's working a lot at defensive back, a position of need over there. I mean, he had some big time catches. I mean, in particular, Michigan State game when Michigan was pulling away from the Spartans and they made that 30-14 lead. For some reason, they quit throwing the football as much after that. But there's a kid who makes big plays, and we don't even think about him because we're hearing about his focus on the other side of the ball and doing this Charles Woodson, both sides of the ball routine. I mean, I still think he's going to be a relevant wide receiver, don't you?
Oh, there's no question, but I think it might be a limited sort of thing because of the very reason you mentioned, need. They're so stacked at wide receiver, and they can use defensive backs, and certainly Mike Sainristil has played well enough to be considered a starter as far as when you talk about nickel packages and things like that. Where I would see Mike Sainristil coming back over to the offensive side would be if you get in that situation where, boy, they've made some mistakes and they're down and they really have to go to the passing
Yeah.
game and they're trotting out 4 and 5 wide receivers. That's where I would see a Mikey Sainristil coming back over and being one of those guys that you could really count on to make some catches, maybe when the attention's drawn off to one of your other top guys.
Yeah, and the same thing goes for Ronnie Bell. Those dig routes and drag routes. I mean, when is a 3rd and 8? I mean, in a crucial time, maybe Michigan's behind at the time. You're going to go with your veteran receiver more than you would, for example, a Darius Clemens in that situation. So anyway, that one that's not caught. The receiver room is not causing Jim Harbaugh sleepless nights. We'll just make that statement. I'm assuming.
Yes, I would agree with that, and Jim Harbaugh has already expressed his enthusiasm for the wide receivers. Let's switch over to the defensive side of the football because we hadn't paid much attention there yet. And if you don't do that, Mozzie Smith may well break into the broadcast studio and start throwing our stuff around.
Yeah.
What are some of the key things that you're going to be looking at for in these first games in the opener against Colorado State to kind of indicate to you that, hey, okay, they've done well in plugging in. I get it. It's not what it's going to be like against Iowa, Penn State, Michigan State, But what will you be looking for? What will Tom Crawford be looking to identify on the defensive side that says, okay, that looks good?
Well, I mean, I'm interested with Chris Jenkins. I think Harbaugh at the presser yesterday mentioned they moved him to the outside, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken, and
Hmm.
which is that shows you the versatility of that young man, and also shows you the potency of a Mason Graham on the inside, Mozzie Smith, of how dominating they're perceived to be. I'm looking at the interior when I have my binoculars up in the press box. When Michigan's on the defensive side of the ball, I'm going to look clearly in the interior and see what's going on. See what kind of push Michigan is going to get up the middle in the pass rush situation. Last year, it always came from the ends. We know that because you had your brilliant David Ojabo, obviously, and Aiden Hutchinson. But it's good if you can be disruptive in the middle. Keep saying it. I marvel at what Georgia is able to do in that regard. Drove Cade McNamara crazy, as it drove everybody crazy, whoever Georgia was playing. And Alabama's done it for years, getting a 330-pound freak of nature to clog up the middle and wreak havoc up the middle. I'm talking about in the pass rush, and then obviously stopping the run. Can Michigan can Michigan's interior D line stop the run against good teams moving forward? When they're beyond when we get out of September, they're playing Iowa, or when they're playing Penn State, Michigan State, Wisconsin, especially Wisconsin, and running the football. Are they going to be able to defend the run? That's what I'm going to be looking for because when Michigan's gotten in trouble in the past defensively, John, we all know it. It's when they haven't been able to stop the run. And last year against Michigan State, what happened? They couldn't stop the run. One dude in particular, and Kenneth Walker the third, and it was a nightmare. They can't have those kind of things happen. And I think Michigan's addressed this defensive need in its interior line.
I will give you two things that I'm going to be looking for in the opener and beyond, and that's sort of complements what you were saying. Where are they going to get their edge rushers after they lost a couple of incredible edge rushers last year? And how creative will they have to get in doing that? We've already heard Junior Colson is going to be somebody that they employ in the pass rush game. They could move him out and have him coming off the edge, or they could, do various things. How creative can they get? Um, and what are you going to see there? And also, are they going to be able to put enough pressure on that gives these defensive backs a situation where they have enough time and hold up pretty well? I'm just, that's they've replaced guys there, and I just think that okay, they've got to give these guys some time early to allow them to be able to be settled in, and that does mean putting pressure on a quarterback.
Yeah, Jalen Harrell. I mean, Mike Morris. I think you're gonna be able to evaluate how if Michigan's able to set the edge, which is the biggest priority, is setting the edge, making sure you're turning. You're not letting anything get outside. With Michigan's struggles defensively, a lot of times, besides not clogging up the middle, is getting guys on the outside, letting him on the outside. Aiden Hutchinson was so good, so powerful in that regard, as along with a Jabo. If they, can contain, move, just herd things inside and get some help from your friends on the inside, they'll be just fine against the good teams. But so yeah, I'm looking at the DNs. It doesn't sound like to me that and I don't know if it's just this year. I think it was started last year. I mean, Jim Harbaugh is really optimistic like I've never seen him before. When he talks about both sides of the ball, we got that yesterday, and I think he likes this defense. And maybe Jesse Mentors. I think the idea that you got a Baltimore Ravens pedigree to it is consistent. So there's not a huge amount of adjustment. The McGregor kid was hurt in high school. How's he going? Braden McGregor how's he going to do? Is he going to be relevant? I mean, I heard he's had a good summer. So some new names that have been around that have played football but they're going to have bigger roles. That's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
And you just reminded me through the mention of the Michigan State game, one other big thing I'm going to be looking forward to out of a Jesse Minter defense. Do they get on and off the field in personnel switching, or the
Yes.
multiple guys that can do multiple things on the field, so that they do not face those situations where they get caught not being ready for a play. And that was
Well,
another major aspect of that
that
Michigan State.
one series I'm trying to think was the third quarter where that was clearly obvious to everybody. That was crazy. And but that got that got cleaned up. I don't think that happened again. Unfortunately, it happened against Michigan State. But
Right.
yeah, that's a really good example of what you do not want to see against a good running team. And there are going to be good running teams on that schedule. There's no question about it.
Never saw a moment where Aiden Hutchinson was more frustrated than after that game, where he basically said that Michigan gave them 2 touchdowns by not being prepped or prepared for a play, by not having everybody set. So
Right, right.
that's tough. You cannot have that. Mason Graham, you mentioned, a true freshman that has earned a starting job, at least in the base defense, as a defensive tackle. I mean, we'd heard about him, but you hear about a lot of young guys. It's one thing to hear, yeah, he's really made some plays and he shows flashes, but all of a sudden, okay, in a base defense, he's a starting DT for
Yeah.
this team. That's saying something.
Well, it takes me back to Mark Mesner, going back 40 years, 1985, out of Detroit Catholic Central. It's like the guy's a freshman. How can he be? How can this guy be starting? But he was, because he was that good. And we've been hearing about Mason Graham all summer, and he's been thrown around. And the way Jim talked about him yesterday, when you say, yeah, he's going to start in the base defense, he's a starter. And that will be interesting to see how he does. He's a big dude. Once again, getting big guys. This is the high level power fives versus the smaller levels of football. It's when you get big size on the D line. Michigan historically has not had big defensive linemen versus a lot of other top teams. Big, huge guys. They just haven't. They've had quick guys, but they haven't had these big bruisers, and they got some this year, and it's going to be interesting see if that makes a difference.
Got a few earth movers, no doubt about it. When you talk about this defense, one of the things that shocked me a little bit was Jamon Green, one of your starting cornerbacks. I asked him a question about how this defense tries to match the level of last year's or even exceed it. And unprompted, I mean, he was saying things about creating more turnovers and things that a couple guys said, DJ Turner as well. That's got to be a staple for this defense, to create more turnovers than it has in the recent past. But then unprompted, you've got Jamon Green saying this defense is flat out going to be faster than the defense last year. And that kind of, to me, was an eye opener.
Yeah, and but I mean, we're brimming. They're coming out of camp. They're out of camp. They're in the game week, so maybe might got caught up in the euphoria. That stood out, that comment. I saw your quote on that. So that's exciting to hear, and I'm excited to see number 2 out there, Will Johnson, who heralded freshman. How much he's going to play. It's a tough position to adapt, to be in a secondary. I mean, to be a wide receiver as a true freshman, that's probably the easiest adjustment to the higher level going to college football, Big Ten college football. But in the secondary, you got so many reactionary responsibilities and coverages, disguise coverage, and things like that. You have to perform at. It's probably more of a learning curve, but this guy is an incredible athlete, and I cannot wait to see him play. So he might be somebody who emerges. I'm not saying he's going to be Charles Woodson in 1995, but he's going to play a lot of football.
Why not? I mean, all we ask is 2 picks against Ohio State. I mean, what?
Yeah, but he didn't get that pick against Michigan State. You remember that one?
Oh, yes, I do. I remember a lot about Michigan State in 1995.
Yeah. Yeah.
when the chain gang brought out
Oh
the
yeah.
8 yard the 9 yard chain for one crucial first down. But
Yeah.
we could go chapter and verse on the funny things that happen in East Lansing. Uh, you know all about that.
Yeah.
Before we, or as we're wrapping this thing up, I do. I mean, we would be a little bit remiss to not to mention Colorado State, other than in the passing. You know, they're one of the guys. You know, one of the three rollovers in the first three games. You got Jay Norvell, who you referenced as a good coach, and I was seeing some of his comments about the Colorado State fall camp. And he was very pleased about a few things. One is that they did a really high level of hitting for a fall camp
Yeah.
right before season, and they were doing so uh, without a lot of injury. I mean, nothing serious, so that they feel like they're in pretty good shape there. What kind of a chance do you have of Colorado State making this a serious second half game? And what do you think the reaction would be to the faithful in the big house should that happen?
Well, I mean, Michigan could help that cause by turning the ball over, which will be interesting to see if that happens, because that's how you keep inferior opponents in games, and that's how you have superior opponents blow you out, is turning the ball over. So Michigan could help in that regard. Clay Millen, their quarterback, was at Nevada last year. It came with a coach. I think the coach took half a team and maybe a bunch of coaches as well. So this is like Nevada 2.0 up there in Fort Collins. So it's going to be interesting to see when they talk about themselves as being a real strong aerial attack. How are they going to throw the football around? That's what I was mentioning earlier. I think it's going to be an entertaining game in that regard. You know, if Michigan takes care of business and doesn't turn the ball over, I don't think it's going to be a third quarter game. I think it's going to be 21 points at halftime, 17-21 at halftime, and then go on to a cozy 38-7 or something like that. Michigan typically doesn't blow people out, and the opportunity to get a lot of kids in. But Colorado State wants that school wants to be the king of the Mountain West. That's why they went after Jay Norville, and we'll see what happens. But it's just we'll see. I'll tell you when how we'll evaluate Colorado State is how if they go next week, they come home to Fort Collins and they lose to Middle Tennessee,
Hmm.
then they're not a very good football team. Once again, I evaluate the quality of teams a few games into the season before I draw conclusions.
Well, and we will be doing that with this Michigan team throughout the year, evaluating how good they really are. I think in this first game, you've got both sides of the ball for Michigan really going to want to make a point. The offense wanting to come out there and say, look, we are going to be everything that people have been expecting and more. We're going to dominate. You got the defense that already has that chip on their shoulder because they've heard, okay, this is the side that you got to worry about because you plugged in new guys, and they're a little bit ticked off about that. I can guarantee you that. So it's going to be a lot of fun to watch opening day for Michigan football 4 days away. Tom Crawford, always appreciate you joining us.
Yeah.
We'll be doing this very often, and appreciate it that you joined us, and that we got to talk. You know, I can remember it seemed like just a couple weeks ago we were saying, well, yeah, it's we're out of spring ball now, but football, it's going to go faster than you think.
Yeah.
Well, here it is.
Here it is. It's game week, and it's always a pleasure being on with you, John. I love the new format. Look forward to getting some input from our listeners, and because they're at the Wolverine.com, there's some pretty sharp dudes that follow the Wolverines and are passionate about it, and look forward to sharing ideas and posing questions with each other on the Wolverines.